are given to share. May the spirit of love make us one indeed. One the love that we share, one our hope in despair, one the cross that we bear. So my pain is pain for you, in your joy is my joy too. All is brought together in the Lord. We are many parts, we are all one body, and the gifts we have, we are given to share. May the spirit of love make us one indeed. One the love that we share, one our hope in despair, one the cross that we bear.
Welcome to your cathedral. I'm Father Greg Sakowitz. A doctor goes in for a haircut. The barber finishes and the doctor says, "What do I owe you?" And the barber says, "Well, I never charge a doctor." Next morning when the barber arrives at his barber shop, there's a beautiful thank you note and a bottle of champagne from the doctor thanking the barber. A lawyer goes in for a haircut and the barber finishes. Lawyer says, "What do I owe you?" And barber says, "I never charge a lawyer." Next day, when the barber arrives at the barber shop, there's a beautiful thank you note and a bottle of wine from the lawyer thanking the barber. Next day, priest goes in for a haircut and the barber finishes and the priest says, "What do I owe you?" And the barber says, "I never charge a man the cloth." Next morning when the barber arrives, there's 12 priests at the front door. Father Mark is just shaking his head. I like that joke a lot. Special thank you again to Mark Teresi, a dear friend. Again, his beautiful singing voice, week in and week out. Mark, thank you for being part of this spiritual video. Special thanks also to David Jonas, our director of music here at the cathedral. David, you play so beautifully and accompany Mark so well. So David and Mark, thank you. Special thanks again to Father Mark, producer Smolka, who does a marvelous job with his video production, week in and week out, all his B-roll and his great creativity and all the work he does at the cathedral. So Father Mark, thank you very much. Priest gets up to the pulpit and says, begins with this homily, "Everybody in this parish will one day die." A little old guy in the first pew starts laughing. And the priest says, "Let me repeat myself. Everybody in this parish will one day die." The little old man in the first pew is laughing aloud. The whole church can hear him. The priest says, "Let me share one more time. Every man, woman, adult, child in this parish will one day die." The little old guy is laughing so much, he flips over the pew in laughter on his back, laughing hysterically. The priest says, "Excuse me, sir," to the little old man, "what seems to be so funny?" The old guy says, "I don't belong to this parish." Now that is really funny, if I say so myself. You know, it's so easy to sometimes think that what I own is mine, forgetting that in life we are stewards, not owners. All is gift, all is gift. Give it away, give it away. We're called to be givers, not takers. It's sometimes easier to remain angry than to reach out your hand and seek someone's forgiveness. I've always said before, through Cardinal Supich, a great line, forgiving doesn't change the past, it changes the future. And it's important to remember as Christians, we are responsible for one another. We are responsible for each other. In today's second reading, this 23rd Sunday in Ordinary Time, Cycle A, Paul tells the Romans that all the commandments may be summed up this way: You shall love your neighbor as yourself. I've also heard it put this way: you shall love your neighbor who is like yourself. I like both. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. You shall love your neighbor who is like yourself. The following true story in my life summarizes beautifully Paul's strong message to the Romans and to each and every one of us. Back in July of 1990, I spent 1 week of very intense studies at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. By the end of the week, I was tired and looking for a quiet plane ride back home to Chicago. I lucked out with a window seat for the return trip with no one sitting next to me. I said, thank God, the seat next to me in the middle is empty. I had the window seat. This is great. 2.5 hours of reading, napping, looking out the window, no one to bother me. I said, praise God. As I looked across the aisle of where I sat, while still on the ground, I noticed a little boy crying. I further noticed he had an empty seat next to him. He was traveling alone. So I prayed, dear God, make that little boy stop crying. Well, he only cried harder. I thought to myself, what about my nap? What about my reading time? Well, life always doesn't move by my plans or timetable, and Christian living is a willingness to be inconvenienced. So I leaned over and I asked the little boy, why are you crying? He said his parents had just divorced and he was going to join his dad in Kansas. He further said he was going to miss his mom very, very much, and this was his very first plane ride. My heart totally dropped. So I asked him if he would like my window seat. He said he'd like to sit at the window, so I gave up my window seat, and I sat in the empty seat next to him. So went my quiet plane ride back home to Chicago. This little boy, Christopher, I think it was the age 8, 9, or 10, spoke nonstop for over 2 hours straight from Harvard University, I think it was Boston Airport, back to Chicago. This little boy pulled out his duffel bag and showed me his entire family album of photos of his family, his complete baseball card collection, and to top it off, he insisted that I draw with him in his coloring book. I almost died. But it was during our coloring session that little Christopher made 2 profound comments that I will never forget. At one point, we are drawing in his coloring book, and Christopher said, let's take my crayons, break them in half, and give everybody on this plane a half a crayon to Crayola and draw in my coloring book. Christopher had the 64 crayon pack, and this kid wasn't kidding. I asked him, Christopher, why would you want to break your crayons in half and share them with everyone? And here's what this 8-year-old little boy said: because love is more powerful than gravity. Love is powerful. From an 8-year-old, I wrote it down on a napkin. I'll say it again. This little boy said, because love is more powerful than gravity. Love is powerful. What an incredible response. And I thought to myself, I've never heard it put that way. I was able to talk him out of his idea of breaking the crayons in half to everybody in the plane. About 10 minutes later, as a way to get out of coloring, I was never an artist. I don't like coloring. I'm coloring with little Christopher. I'm getting tired and bored. So I said, Christopher, I'm a terrible artist. I cannot draw. Christopher looked at me and said, you can do it if you put your mind to it. I couldn't draw either until I put my mind to it and gave it a try. I had hoped for a quiet, peaceful plane ride home back to Chicago. Instead, I end up next to a little boy who, despite his hurts, his pains, his feeling abandoned and shattered by his parents' divorce, was putting into practice Paul's words, "You shall love your neighbor as yourself." You know, if we focus only on ourselves with our hurts, limitations, and sins, we quickly give way to unhappiness, discouragement, resentment, and bitterness. But if we focus our eyes on the Lord, focus on others, get out of sight of oneself, then our hearts are filled with hope. Only then will we begin to see God's people in a new light. For we cannot live without hope. We cannot live without love. We listened today, where 2 or 3 are gathered in my name, there I am in your midst. Because God is present first, and great things can happen. There's a rabbinical saying that goes like this: wherever you see another, there I am. Wherever you see another, there I am. Our readings focus on one reality. We are called to love and be responsible to each other and to look beyond oneself. Always live for others. How do we do this? It may mean speaking up when it would be easier to remain silent. It may mean confronting when it would be so much easier to turn our backs. It may mean reaching out even when we are hurting, like that little boy Christopher. It would be so much easier to say, "Leave me alone, I want to be left alone." All of us need to love this world back into life, despite COVID-19 and racial unrest. Today's readings were not written to instruct, but rather to awaken. For seeing is done in a flash, but opening one's eyes may take a lifetime. For seeing is done in a flash, but opening one's eyes may take a lifetime. May God bless all of you. Stay healthy.
In